This course is technically titled The History of Anthropological Thought. And as I've been teaching this book, I've often wondered if I could get away with teaching this book as the history of anthropological thought, because most people would not have let me do that. Because you're supposed to just pound it out one by one. But honestly, in this chapter, we have the whole history of anthropological thought just in one chapter. I think the next time I teach this class, I'll just teach this one chapter and we'll go through it the whole semester. We'll just go piece by piece. We can unpack this chapter. It's all there. Unfortunately, it's slightly a little bit jumbled up and he keeps going back and forth between things and he assumes you already know all of this stuff, but it's all there. Starting 500 years ago, at least, with Enlightenment humanism, which is where many of the academic disciplines believe they are rooted in, but also dealing with things that were very important to anthropology, which is how the Enlightenment was linked to and proceeded from and drew energy from colonialism, going through biological anthropology and all those ideas about evolution and Darwin and how people got here and how they evolved and what is a human being, even some Neanderthal stuff. And oh my goodness, we could do all of that. I didn't do much of that in your comments, so I'm just gonna. And then we could go into all those eugenics and the anthropologists who probably unfortunately supported that and talked about the division of people into races and this whole thing. The idea of the human career as an ascent from rude nature through shades of savagery and barbarism to the perfection of the human condition in refined civility. I drew that on the board. Remember that? Lewis Henry Morgan, who is in the end note there. That's the most famous proponent of that. I was hoping somebody would send me a picture of what I drew, but I have to go back and find it myself. We have the history of, well, a broad-based strokes history of our archaeology here. And then we also get the Boasian anthropology of the United States and cultural anthropology as it got incorporated into the humanist project, especially after World War II. And then we finally get up to the now when people are talking about the Anthropocene. You've heard this word, the Anthropocene. This idea that we're in a new epoch of we're out of the Holocene now. We're in the Anthropocene, a new epoch in which human activity is more important than any other activity. And a number of scholars who believe that we either are in or entering an era of post-humanism. So there it all is, everything you need to know. Maybe I should have started with this chapter. We could have read this first thing. Yeah, it would have been pretty confused. Still confused. Yeah. So we have to sort out a couple terms here that are both in the title of the chapter, except for verse. Post-human prehistory, prehistory, post-human. What? So what are these terms? So when is prehistory? Anytime before writing. And I say traditionally because the historians now want to claim that they can do history back and before writing. But in the old days, if it wasn't written down, it wasn't history. You didn't care about that. That was just unwritten stuff. That was prehistory. Yeah. No, I'm not making this up. Well, it is and it isn't. And I would say because the word history has a double meaning in English. It means what happened, but it also means the story of what happened. For the historians, if you don't have a story of what happened, how can you say what happened? No reason. Yeah, so you have to do something else. So prehistory is the before writing part of this. Yes. Traditionally, prehistory is what comes before writing. And once you get settled down, especially with agriculture, I put a little dash in there. Notice that in traditional thought, culture and agriculture go together. And when does this all start? I'm betting almost all of you took this giant class, one of the most popular classes in anthropology, maybe last year. Ancient Civ. Yeah, exactly. That's when it's all supposed to have happened. You settle all these people down, you get them into cities, writing starts. Right. Yeah. That's why the Inca are always so problematic. It's like, were they writing or not? They're just using those ropes, knotted strings. They didn't have writing. Are they civilized? Honestly, people are like, The Inca are uncivilized because they had those knots and threads. Ingold talked about those knots and threads in the threading chapter. The basket. So again, this is just, I'm not saying all these things are true. I'm saying this is the way we've traditionally looked at things. And so you have prehistory, that's before writing. Then writing comes, and then you start to have civilization, and you start that. It's ancient. It's not real. And then for most of the humanists, it really starts in the Renaissance, which technically is the rebirth of what or they think they are rebirthing one of those ancient civilizations, Greece and Rome. Renaissance, rebirth, 1500 about, and the Enlightenment, which is generally later on, a couple hundred years later. And this, in some ways, maybe I'm not sure when we went peak humanities, maybe mid last century. It's hard to say, but it's had a good run, let's say. The Harvard College and the college experience is based on a notion of the humanities. We're supposed to be Renaissance people engaging in liberal arts and drawing from all these sources, getting smarter, getting rational, putting our instincts away, getting more and more smarter and smarter. The whole idea that we would be educated people is a product of these traditions in which people would study the humanities, or in the old days, science and the humanities were seen as one and the same thing. You got a doctorate, the PhD is a doctorate in philosophy, and it would just be you'd have a PhD in various disciplines, but originally we were all philosophers. Everybody would consider themselves to be a philosopher of something. Now, posthumanism has come to us, and now I'm going to be making some generalizations. Posthumanism is mostly an academic movement, which is related to some other kinds of movements that came before, but posthumanism is the more cool way to say it now. And when I was growing up in academia, we had what was called postmodernism, which is related. You can see this, well, and then deconstruction, which is most associated with Jacques Derrida, who comes into this chapter a little bit, but that would be maybe even older. But especially in the terms postmodernism and posthumanism, what they're saying is we still have the residue of modernism or humanism. We haven't really gone beyond that. It's still with us, but we're in some other phase. And what all of these movements, again, mostly in academia, have in common is the idea that this project of extending humanity out to everyone, that everyone would be educated and democratic, has had its successes for sure. It's been a very successful project, but it's rather troubled now. Many people would reject some of the ideas that were seen to be as universal in the West, and probably with good reason. It seems to be that we are entering a different world, or that the old ideas about universal emancipation of humans and that science would triumph over nature, that reason would triumph, or yes, that intellect and reason would triumph over instinct, has been definitely challenged in recent years. Some of these people say, or the reason we need to go into maybe posthumanism is that they would point to things like climate change and the ravages of industrialization and say, well, that was created by, that's the Anthropocene. That's the mess that anthropocentrism got us into. And so in their view, science has made all of life, or is threatening all of human life. We have to think about posthumanism because we're trying to get out of this situation. The idea of the posthumanism is that we are in some ways going beyond this idea of the human. And there's at least two different versions of this. One would be the people who are more into the technological side, and that we're all going to be cyborgs, and everything is techno now. And then there's the other side of this who want to help us to understand how we humans are not the center of the universe, and that we need to be more in touch with our more than human other friends and pets and the creatures of the world out there. So this is when Ingold is dealing with these terms and he's talking about that. I mean, he's roughly referring to these kinds of movements within academia and our view of it. So let's deal with the prehistory part a little bit, the time before writing. By the way, who was around, not of you, who people are around in this prehistory? Who populates the landscape? Yeah, Jonathan. Hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers. Yeah, see, that's why I wrote that on the board the other day. These are the people who don't have writing. They are the hunter-gatherers. Once they were called the hunters, and then we added on the gatherers. So in the world of the hunter-gatherers, they are said to live more in a world of evolution than history. As I say, many people have seen the hunter-gatherer lifestyle as governed by natural selection, governed by the terms of evolution. They don't really have a history because they're locked into nature at the beginning of history. They haven't begun being historical yet, in part because they're not writing, but they're not changing again, there's the stereotypical view that they're not altering the landscape, or they're just moving with it on it. Again, in the traditional view, the hunter-gatherer, that's the polite term, is governed more by instinct than by reason. They're not, you never hear of the hunter-gatherer scientist. I mean, you just don't. You don't have a scholarship for hunter-gatherers. I'm making this up, but it's like you would say that they are, again, this is traditional view, is that they are governed by their instincts. And that is why hunter-gatherer is the polite term. People used to say that these were wild man, or man in a state of nature, or savages. In this view, nature is more important than culture. Culture hasn't started yet. Again, this is a viewpoint that predates anthropology. Anthropology would try to, by the way, anthropology would argue that hunter-gatherers do have history, that they do have reason, and they do have culture, and that culture starts way far back in the human lineage. But this is the traditional view. But anthropology hasn't been all good about this. We're the people who set this up. What was fascinating to me about this is it's seen as not just a stage in human history, it's also what babies are like. It's applied to kids. So kids are all instinct and they don't have culture yet. They're all natural and they just are flopping around. And then you train them into having culture and they gradually come up and now they're educated. And it echoes this phase of human history when we were pre-culture and prehistoric and all those things. It's like children. I should probably just read this. Writing only a few decades ago, anthropologist Walter Goldschmidt could still assert, as though it were self-evident, that childhood is characterized by the process of transformation of the infant from a purely biological being into a culture-bearing one. So, in the same way, these hunter-gatherers are seen as a biological being in a natural world, and then we finally get to history. We finally get to, again, usually the mark point for this has been agriculture. That's when people got agriculture, and once they did that, they started writing things down and recording them. And if you remember when we were talking about the Greeks and how they were very afraid of those people who were coming in from the sea, who would maraud them, and the nomads and all those things? Because the people who had agriculture and settled villages are always having to fight off these barbarians coming through on horseback, and the herders of animals and the seafarers. And if you look at historical records from a long time ago, it's this back and forth between, oh, we're defending the city walls against the bar. Here they're coming in. Oh no, they're destroyed all our books again. Shit. Go back to the beginning. It's this dynamic. And so in the history books, the nomads are always bad because they're always coming in and sacking your village and then riding off. The barbarians are always terrible. And the Greeks were just as bad about this as anybody. They'd be like, no, those people are barbarians, which, as you probably know, comes from this idea that they can't speak. All their language sounds like bar, 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 bar. Barbarians. So this is the idea that has been had. And in this notion, which many anthropologists still promote, When we domesticate plants and animals, then humans start to become controllers of nature. Before we're just in nature, we're chasing nature around, we're chasing animals around, we're chasing berries around. We're trying to be out there in nature, but once we domesticate things, now we're controlling nature. We're riding that elephant. PowerPoint told me I could ride the elephant just like that. Yeah, when I did this, PowerPoint said we're controlling nature. You're on top of the elephant. The elephant isn't trampling us anymore. We're on top of it. So in this view, this is where reason begins, intellect begins. This is where culture begins, agriculture, and it's where humans start to dominate or take control of the natural process. How are we doing? We good?
Oh, yeah, we got this.
You got this? Okay. Again, this is just
still clarifying, you're teaching like traditional view.
yeah, this is all traditional view. This is all traditional view. Although you would be surprised how much this shows up in your standard anthropological textbook. This idea that domestication of plants and animals is the line between humans being controlled by nature to start controlling nature. Yeah, there now has been a counterpoint, but it's still seen as this watershed moment back when it's not necessarily seen as good. Reversing the bad and the good doesn't change the fact that it's a watershed moment. You see what I'm saying? A lot of anthropologists will just say that's when that was our downfall. That sucked. But it still is a division. It's still good, bad. It's just you reverse the division. And yes, this is traditional, but it really seeps into all kinds of things that we have. It's hard to get out of it because this has been taught to us for hundreds of years. This is an invention of the Renaissance Enlightenment, which has, again, underwrites most of our education. And as Ingold says, all sorts of TV shows too. Wait a second. Yeah, this is the traditional view. It's surprisingly, again, or not surprisingly, it still seeps into a lot of intro to anthropology textbooks and even past intro to anthropology. Well, the very title of a course called Ancient Civilizations. Like, what exactly is a civilization? I guess where a bunch of people got very violent to each other and where there's these very male-dominated violent spaces. This view of people and human history is in some ways a product of the Enlightenment. None of the people before the Enlightenment, including that lived in these ancient civilizations, would have thought of themselves as, oh, we have history now because I'm writing things down, or I am living in the prehistoric. This is a projection that we have onto the past. When somebody was sowing those first crops, they weren't like, I'm controlling nature now, here I go. They were doing their thing. They were just living. And the same thing with all those people in those ancient civilizations. They may have seen other people as barbaric, but they didn't see themselves as on the cusp of reason or intellect or enlightenment. The reason I say that is before the Enlightenment, as Ingold starts this chapter off with Vico, who is on the edge there, at 1725, he claimed that the whole root of the word human had to do with humus and the ground. And it turns out that he was probably crazy to think that, but it was an interesting idea, and it did reflect the pre-Enlightenment view, you might say, that to be human was to be able to bury your dead and to be regenerated from that. That's Vico's idea, that human came from Latin burial, which Ingold says in an endnote. Other scholars have been like, what do they call it? One of his more fanciful etymological suggestions. Well, it's hard to say, and it's hard to say where the term human comes from. But yes, one of Vico's more fanciful etymologies. But it's an interesting idea. And it also relates to this idea that before humanism, you don't dig things up. That's evil. That's digging up the dead. You're probably going to do evil stuff with them. No, that's your burial ground. We go from that to the idea that humans are better than the earth. We live on the top of the earth, but we're not of the earth, or we're not in the earth. And then when we bury people, what happens to them? You go back to nature. You go back to nature. But the idea in the Enlightenment view is not that the earth would regenerate you. When you're alive, you're above nature and you're up here above the earth. But when you go into the earth, then you're dead and then you become nature again. If that is true, what can we say about archaeology? Remember, in the old days, you couldn't dig things up
Necromancy.
because it's necromancy. But if we're on top of the earth and the earth, we're just depositing stuff down there, what should we do? Sure.
Yeah.
Hey, man, we got a lot of good stuff down there. Let's go find out what it is. It's just before it decays and turns back into nature, go get it. Where did the archaeologists go? What were they up to?
What, stealing the indigenous bodies?
Yeah,
That's bad.
that's bad. But it got sanctioned by the Enlightenment because it's like, hey, there they are. No one else is doing anything with them. We got to go find out what happened. So let's go dig it up. And yeah, Ingold says that this is a problem for Native peoples if your burials are the source of your regeneration. And then somebody goes in and digs it all up and takes it away to a museum. Yeah, then you don't have that anymore. And he says, yeah, it's great to give these things back and repatriate them. But once you break that cycle, it's not the same. So this is, again, traditional view is that, hey, there's just layers there. It's just deposits. Our job is to figure out who those people were, understand them. Now, Ingold does say, and I agree with this, that some people get so way down on archaeology. I don't, even though it's fun. He says there, I think it was very important, that the problem wasn't, the colonial problem was not the archaeologists. The problem was the Enlightenment idea that we are going to excavate the earth and take out all the minerals and take out all the stuff and take the silver and the gold and the oil and everything. And that this archaeology did its thing, but the real thing was the colonial mines and the felling the forests and getting rid of all the people and trying to build eventually an industrial society from that. We really shouldn't get too down on the archaeologists. They're a sideshow to that. I think that's probably still true a little bit today. When does most archaeology occur, really? Is it from academics writing grants? And no.
It's all land development.
Yeah, it would be nice if it were serving something else. But if you weren't there and there wasn't a law, they'd just be bulldozing it all up. Oh, here's some poses. But if they found something cool, yeah, if you find a gold piece or something, you'd go sell that. But as far as, yeah, so totally agree. The real problem is not archaeology. The real problem is the people who are just duplicating modern society in order to sell us gasoline and cheeseburgers. So this is what happens. Now, as a product of the Enlightenment, though, one of the big questions is how did humans get to be humans? How did the humans happen? How did humans get to be humans?
God?
Yeah, good. Oh, good.
Okay, prehistory people didn't know they were in prehistory. Meant people, yes, we are in the hashtag Enlightenment. Like, did they know? Did they name themselves?
Okay.
They get awfully haughty about what they were doing.
Yes. So so the Renaissance, part of it is us naming these epics from part of it is us, but there were definitely people in the Renaissance who believed that they were rebirthing ancient Greece and rebirthing Rome. So they were starting to be self-aware of that. And certainly by the time of the Enlightenment, again, it's often a label that we place on various intellectual movements, but there were people who believed they were bringing reason to life. They were enlightening, and that before, they would definitely be the ones who would call the previous period the Dark Ages. So they'd be like they were living in the Dark Ages. Now, the people in the Dark Ages probably did not believe that they were living in the Dark Ages, because who would want to say that? I'm living in the dark here. But yeah, to varying degrees. But some of this is ourselves projecting back onto them and ourselves, our own renaissance of the Renaissance, you might say. Yeah, no, I think that Ingold and other writings, it remarks things like we should not trust he quotes somebody to say we should not trust Plato just because he was a Greek. The thing is, they do have that. There's this whole mystification of them, how people with English accents sometimes sound smart. If you say you're quoting somebody who's a Greek, and it's like, oh my gosh, well, no. Ingold is trying to look for some of the submerged Greek philosophers. So Herodotus, for example, and his can't step into a river twice. That was not mainstream Greek philosophy. That was the subgen. But honestly, it is a little bit hard to get an Aztec philosopher.
They were the not?
Those were the Inca. They had a form that, yeah, you might be able, maybe a Maya philosopher. It's just, yeah, well,
Who wrote about the Aztec Empire 50, 60 years after conquest.
yeah, no, those sources are hugely important for historians and what life was like then. But to be able to cite them in a philosophical tradition is difficult.
I suppose that's fair.
Yeah, but I would say in his defense, he definitely, the Renaissance people believe that there was some through line between what they were doing in Europe and that the Renaissance was the rebirth of Greece. And to the credit of people like Ingold, they think that's bullshit. That was a claim that the Renaissance made. Yeah, well, part of the thing is that during this period, the Renaissance, during the Renaissance and during the Enlightenment, people are creating the notion of a Europe as opposed to the people out there. There wasn't really this notion of a European essence before you had the Americas and before you this idea of why. And so one of the reasons that the archaeologists were trying to dig all these people up in different places was to figure out how humans got here. That was one of the huge mysteries of the Americas. How are there people here? Did God create multiple races of humans? Did he create these people here? You had to dig them up to find out. Many people still justify analyzing indigenous, like the Kennewick Man dispute was all about, could we find out something from those bones? So, in the Renaissance, however, as you remember from the hands picture, the idea was that people were created by God and had these godlike powers. And again, we would elevate ourselves above the animals. Now, then though, we have the advent of evolution has a very different idea about things. So Darwin, who is, let's say, do we want to put him in the late Enlightenment? 19th century, it would be too late. Darwin argues, or begins to argue, that humans are different from animals, not because there's some qualitative break between the human and the animal, but because of a matter of degrees. And you could find intelligence in the lowly earthworm, whereas even the smartest humans had instincts. This is probably, we all know this now, or at least Darwin. So again, in his Origins of Species, as Ingold says, Darwin doesn't talk about human beings, but he would later start talking about them. Let's see. Darwin would claim to detect the rudiments of intellect in even the humblest of organisms, such as the lowly earthworm, as well as a powerful residue of instinct in even the most rational of humans. For Darwin and for evolution, there's no animal-human dividing line. So we're all on a scale, and there's no Rubicon to cross. There's no strict thing. But the problem with that, or one of the natural outcomes of that, is that becomes the scale of measure within humans itself. And you remember, maybe I drew this on the board, where intelligence is taken to be the measure of how the civilized person, man, yeah, that's what they did, was raised above the savages. For Darwin, this is later, The Descent of Man, Darwin concluded there is not. His famous and controversial conclusion was rather that the mechanism of natural selection, relentlessly driving up heritable powers of intelligence, had continued to operate as it had ever done, eventually raising civilized men above primitive savages in precisely the way that savages were raised over apes. What does that sound like to you? Now, Ingold says that Darwin himself was no racist.
Was he?
He perhaps was not personally a racist, but certainly his ideas lent credence to all sorts of racist projects. There are writings in which he's better than others. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, I thought yeah, this is probably the English view of things. Yeah. So here we end up in the big deal of humanism. And as Ingold says, humanism has had some big successes. We've had literacy spread far and wide, educational system far and wide, democracy spread far and wide, but two big costs: the extraction of humans from nature and the proliferation of the Stewart's gas stations is now, it's probably true that it's probably that it seems like our whole planet is going to go up in fumes soon. So that's one problem, one cost, a slight cost. And the other thing is that the people who were promoting humanism the most were also the ones who were imposing that upon others in the name of, or not in the name of, as a product of the colonialism that we've been talking about. Now, Darwin's ideas were seen as progressive. Eugenics, when it was in its heyday, was seen as this progressive great thing that would help humanity. But as Ingold says, after World War II and the Holocaust, and people were like, oh boy, not the best idea. This is when Boas, for example, his ideas were not very well accepted in American society until after World War II, when he was dead. And then people were like, okay, true, Boas, maybe people aren't as different as we thought they were. The idea here, which anthropology promotes, and we talked about, is that all humans are intelligent. Obviously, there are differences between individuals, but they're not these big racial differences. Or you could have a hunter-gatherer scholarship. That's fine. Everybody's intelligent. And that all humans have culture. There aren't cultureless humans or pre-cultural humans or those kinds of things. But one of the paradoxes of this is that it brings us the Enlightenment divide right back in. So Darwin had closed the gap between humans and nature, saying that humans are just different by degrees from the rest of the natural world. So in Darwin's view, you do get this continuum. Whereas when we say all humans are intelligent and all humans have culture, well, then in relation to what? Then it brings back this division between the humans. Of course, unfortunately, we're bringing all humans up into that realm, between the humans and natural world again, creating this funny category, which scientists now call us the Homo sapiens sapiens, the smart humans who are also smart about themselves, or the self-aware humans, not the Homo sapiens Neanderthals who were on the other side, caught in that valley somewhere. And so what this does, though, I don't want to go back to the old racist anthropology and the old racist ideas, but you might notice that this sets up another possibility here, a ranking of human societies based on their culture, not necessarily their innate biology. What you're saying is we're all capable of the same things, but it is our society or our culture which makes that happen. If you remember in my little doodlings, I said that one of the issues here is sometimes you swap the terms around. And you start talking about bands and tribes and chiefdoms and states, and then you say, well, but it's not this, it's not that. But you're setting up this ranking of complexity, simplicity that we talked about in the last class. And we might say, well, it's not racist because it's not our biology. We're not saying that people are stupider than other people, but you are reconfiguring that in a different way. And so this does seep still into many anthropology textbooks and many of our TV shows, an idea that there are these moments in history, these watershed moments where those of you who've been on a watershed, it's where you're on the top of a mountain and everything is flowing in two different directions. There's only a little bit of difference here, but eventually it's going to be two different places, or the stages of history. And so the idea is, again, yeah, all right, so agriculture made us all sick instead of made us all better. Still, it's the reverse of what we said. It's still this idea that we've entered this new stage of human history. A couple of you fixed on this quote, which is a great quote. Ingold says, "Yet despite a frantic and much publicized search for the moment of emergence, that moment of anatomically modern humans, prehistorians have failed to find it. Why? Are we just looking in the wrong places? Why haven't we found it? Yeah, there is no moment. For the simple reason that there was no such moment. It is a fabrication of Enlightenment humanism. This idea that somehow we're crossing some Rubicon, and on this side we're in prehistory, and now we're in history. Yay, we're running across the river." Yeah, no, and Ingold says the same. He says that people then they try to push this moment onto the Homo sapiens, the ones that outrun the Neanderthals and get into history. And he says, no, they were equally mixed up. He even declares that Neanderthals are us. So, yeah, the search for the moment. There's this new idea in this chapter around page 314 where Ingold says there are no stages. This whole idea that life comes in stages and moments, but it's our idea of history which also creates this idea of an era before history, because if you have this advent of history, well, then what was going on before? What was it like to live in prehistory? No, you're supposed to say, I can't even imagine that. Yeah, we can't imagine that. We can't imagine that. What would you do? Yeah, no, I thought this was great. It may be conceivable to us, looking back upon the vistas of the past, but it would have been inconceivable to the people of the time. No one could ever imagine themselves living in prehistory. To think as they did would mean having to de-sediment from our minds the deposit of 4 millennia of linear writing, imagining there are no books in the world. So we'd have to get rid of 400 years we'd have to imagine a time before any books. Jonathan would not only have to get rid of all his books, he'd have to imagine that they had never occurred. There was never anybody around to write them. This is an interesting idea, and it's one of the things I've been thinking about as I've been teaching this course when talking about when there were no lights except by fire. You had to have something burning. When there was no mirrors except if you went and looked in the water. When you didn't have clear glass, things looked different back then. But I also think this doesn't happen to you because you were already born. But my kids often ask me things like, how did you apply to college? And I honestly cannot. I remember applying to college, but how did I know where they were? And I think, okay, there wasn't a computer, there wasn't an internet. I must have gotten something in the mail. And then I typed something up on a typewriter and I mailed it to them. I remember it, but it's so inconceivable that I didn't have the internet. It's so inconceivable that you used to have a phone book for all the people in New York City that was this big. It's just, I can't even imagine that anymore. So all these things, they ask, well, how did you get around? Yeah, how did I drive around? You'd have to have a map in the car, a paper map. It was ridiculous. The whole transition from phones, like landlines, to cell phones before they were smartphones. I remember as it started to happen. And for me, you were calling a place. So we used to you'd call a house. But the students were like, once the cell phones came in, they were like, why would you call a house when you can call a person? It was ridiculous. And the phone book gives you the place where the phone line is, but who knows if there was anybody there. When I think back in the old days, yes, we got around and we made trips, but there were all sorts of things that you set up some meeting with somebody and then it never happens and who knows where that person is and then it didn't happen. Whereas now you'd be like, hey, where are you, dude? Get down here. You're 15 minutes late. Whereas in the old days, you're just walking along. That guy didn't show up and there's nothing you can do. We'll call his house and the phone just rings. And yeah, no, you could hide. You could ghost somebody and it would work. Yeah, go back to that. Now, at the end of page 314, Ingold asks, what then is to be done? What does he mean by that? He means now that the project of the Enlightenment is itself foundering. And the problem is that, okay, we've had these various ideas of the human and the specialness of the human and the universals of democracy, education, and literacy, which we want to believe are true and important for all people. But as I noted, things are getting a little crazy out there. I think about this in terms of our current regime in America. It's weird because the current regime in America wants to bring back greatness. That's their whole slogan. Great, make things great again, which is in some ways a glorification of the values of the Enlightenment, you might say, when white guys were on top and things were great and things were big and we built things. What's weird about this, however, is how much they glorify stupidity. It's like reason, spelling, and school. Nah, you don't need any of that. And so it's definitely the project of the Enlightenment is definitely foundering, I would say, even as some people are trying to bring it back. So what do we do? Do we just put people back into nature like Darwin did? Ingold says, let's look back further, not past the Greeks. No, we're going to look at this guy. I never heard of this guy before. So this guy lived pre-Renaissance. Yeah, he was an interesting guy. For one thing, he lived from around 1232 to around 1316, which is a long time ago.
That's an insane amount of time for someone to make it back then. That's insane.
Well, if you could make it through childhood and the childhood disease killers, you had almost of a chance of making it as long as anybody today. It's the disease. It was the childhood diseases that got you. He made it through though. Once you could make it, if you could make it to 30, you could probably make it to. You had almost as an equal chance of making it to 80 or 90. Oh, not quite. I exaggerate, but close to that. Yeah, I was a little bit. First of all, try pronouncing that name. This really bothers me. It's anglicized as Raymond Lully, which would suck, man, if your name was Ramon. So the double L in Spanish is a y sound, but he's got a double L at the end of his name. Well, the problem is it's also in Catalan. It's not Spanish, and it's in the Catalan of the island of Mallorca, which is the kingdom of Mallorca. So let's get Ingold on him. Born and raised on the island of Mallorca, we enjoyed a long and productive life, during which he wrote a staggering 280 books, composed in Latin, Arabic, and his native Catalan. One of the last of these, written in Genoa in 1303, which is where my people are from, in his 71st year was the Logica Nova. So this sent me on something of a, first of all, the kingdom of Mallorca? What the hell? You're like, what? The kingdom of Mallorca? Where's what? The island?
Where are we? Huh? Oh, there.
This pretty big island. It's the 7th largest island in the Mediterranean is Mallorca. It is owned by Spain, but you can tell it's close to Barcelona, which is where the hub of Catalan is in the Catalan language, which is like Spanish, but not quite. It's like French too, but not quite. It's got various things. And here's the island of Mallorca where he was, and he was writing in Genoa, which is over here somewhere. So this caused all sorts of questions in my mind. I went on a Google rabbit hole on this one and I said Mallorca. And they said, well, people also ask, why is Mallorca so famous? Do they speak English there?
You don't know how. Why do America? Why do?
Which are all very important questions. So it's famous because it's a Mediterranean island that has beaches and is very beautiful. They will speak English to you if you go there and you're a tourist. Other Europeans are pretty versed in English. It is possible that Tom Cruise owns a house in Mallorca. Mallorca and Majorca are just different spellings of the same thing. I don't know why Americans go there, but the Germans, as is often their custom, love to vacation in places where they get tired of their Germanness and want to go into the Mediterranean and just live it up. And people usually don't like the Germans on vacation. They get a little wild. Not to stereotype, but yeah, look, why do they like it so much? Well, in the words of you. So what he was trying to think about is how everything is a doing, a happening, a going on. So fire is not things that burn, it is the burning. And he invented a whole new word in Latin. See, Ingold isn't the only one who invents words. He had to invent a new word, umificare, to humanify, to describe the humanness of something. Yeah, I wonder if he would have seen Latin as a dead language. It was the language he was writing in. But yeah, point taken. Yeah, I can make up all kinds of Latin words. You'll never know. Okay. And it relates to one of the first chapters, the baboons that are baboon, that everything is doing their unique thing. But the point is that humans are more like a verb, baboons, that everything is doing its own thing. But he also revisits on this very same page, Liv, an idea that he's talked about before, about the peculiarness of human beings. Yeah, he says that, and in this way, it's one of the few times that Ingold starts to say, no, humans are unique. The uniqueness of humans, one of the unique things about humans is our bipedal gait, that we walk on 2 feet and we fall, we risk falling, and then we regain our footing. And he's wanted to tell us that that's the link between imagination and perception. He's not asking us to be more like baboons or more like nature. He's saying these creatures are what they do and are recognizable by their particular forms of life. But the stretch of humaning, I would argue, makes it of a different order. For it is in the pull of imagination on perception that a space opens up for history. So it's weird because in this sense, Ingold, for one of his only times, is opening up this space of a peculiar human way of being in the world, which is unique. And it's this unique ability to both imagine and perceive and be engaged in the world in new ways. He says that our problem is not anthropocentrism. It's not that humans have been made, that this idea that the posthumanists have, that all of our problems are caused because of the Anthropocene and anthropocentrism, that's not the problem. And what he wants to do is to restore humans as a center of engagement with the world. That we should have humans at the center, but a human that is engaged and flowing outward into the world. And so, Simi, what does he want to do in the last part? The title of your part. Does he want to get rid of humanism? Yeah, he's talking about what he calls the reinvention of humanism. And he's not trying to say that we should just bring it all back. But he's talking here, as he had in other places, about that in some ways to shift it from something that cuts through to something that is transverse or a going along. And that would also do this thing that we would start to think of generations as these braids rather than transversal stacks. And that however tightly bound with others, the thread or the braid retains its own particularity. You said you like this? That's so cool. Is it helping? Is it working? Yeah, so the idea here is that we're going to go back to this humaning, or oh, there's Roy Gurhan. That's what I asked you to comment on. The third track in which people would reintegrate themselves into the natural world or the organic life world. Again, in some ways, he's here criticizing the idea of posthuman as that they've, to go back to our very first reading, the idea that all humans are responsible for the problem that we have in now. The real answer to it is to recapture these ideas. Now, you said you like this, but you don't think it's happening. And I asked you to choose between these two ideas from 1964, at least as translated by Ingold into our own language from Leroy Gurhan. So on the one hand, Leroy Gurhan said that maybe what would happen is that the mechanism, I still can't believe this was written in 1964. It's like before it was when they were carrying around phone books and stuff. It's amazing. Mechanisms of artificial intelligence equipped with emotional moral sensibilities. Once machines have been designed that can outperform human bodies, not only in creative thought, but also in sexual love, the machines will be us. And that's where the AI girlfriends come in. So this is the exteriorization model. The machines will be, so humans won't be done, but we will be will be fully uploaded into the machines. The singularity. He had a different idea, though, a contradictory idea, is that humanity and nature back together ultimately close the gap between them, thereby restoring humans to the continuum of organic life. So I ask you to choose. Okay, I'm glad you said you don't know what that means. That was a little confusing, but the idea is that humans are humans because of our gestures and our voice, and that's the way we present ourselves in the world, right? What Leroy Gourhan called graphism is the fact that when we make gestures, sometimes we're just making gestures like this and no one will ever know about it except if you're recording me. However, if you make a gesture in the sand, like a whorl, that persists for a while. And if you make a rock art and you chisel something into the art, it can persist for thousands of years. Like graphism predates, obviously, writing and is an essential human trait. When you say go back to hunter-gatherers, Ingold is not saying we literally go back, but to recapture that sense of voice, gesture, and a sense of writing, handwriting maybe, that gives us that back. Now, are we headed that way? No. We don't seem to be right now, but are we all gone? Is it done for? Is it over? Yes, yeah, it's over. The only thing I want to clarify here is that neither Ingold nor me, the idea that we would go back, okay, so we're not going to go back. The question is, how do we go forward into something that recaptures that backness? Because we're not going back. And the whole notion of going back is stupid because, for one thing, it recapitulates the idea that we have to go back, that there is a back. The question is, we have to go forward, but how do we go forward? And that is where the answer is. How are we going to go forward? You may all be right that we can't, that we're headed toward the sex machines and the AI girlfriends, and there is nothing we can do about it. But I just want to caution you that the question is not, are we going? We're not going to nuke everything and then we're back. We have to go forward into something else, which is to restore. Now, whether we can do that, I don't know.